Well, hello, good evening, and welcome. Welcome back. Welcome one. Welcome all. How are you, my friends? I hope your day went well. I hope everybody had a purposeful and meaningful day, to say the least. I am out and about myself. I only have one article for tonight, but it's a very important article. We often talk about those, them, they, and they can have many connotations, multiple brackets, shall we say, and all of them. But the person I want to talk about tonight is the architect of tonight's title, Stakeholder Capitalism. I recently seen a recent documentary on him over there, but I came across this article yesterday, and I wanted to bring this to your attention. It is quite detailed, quite a bit long, so we're just going to stick with the one article tonight, but it goes into great detail, not only around the stakeholder capitalism, which is his concept. I am, of course, talking about the World Economic Forum's Klaus Schwab. But before we dive into that, as I always do, please don't forget to give your props and your shouts and your support over to the littlepharma.ie. We love our enzymes so much, we keep them alive. Wheatgrass and barleygrass mighty shot. Small wonder they're so good. One wheatgrass shot is equivalent to 1 kilogram of your leafy green veg, and barleygrass juice is full of antioxidants. Just shake and shoot. As the telegram fills up, great to see Seamus, Stargirl D, Margaret Rooney, Dave McSee, to name but a few. Alternative Media Ireland, good to see you in there. London Irish, as the room is filling up. And Bean Sid 55. Enough from Telegram. Let's jump over to Facebook and Periscope. Catherine, great to see you. Good morning. Good morning. Good afternoon. Good evening. Jenny, great to have you in the live chat over there. Oregon Ire is story. Great to see you. And Open Minds in the house. Big us to all of you. And Instagram. Delighted you could join me tonight. Again, sticking with the security camera theme for you tonight. Thank you for your company here tonight. As Corey reminds us, yes, I've been pushing it and promoting it myself. The Leinster House outside Kildare Street on the 10th of October at 1 p.m. Let Ireland live and end the lockdown. We wouldn't be doing our jobs correctly if they weren't talking about us in the houses of the Oireachtas, or the Dáil, as we call it over here. I see Corey is on both Facebook and Instagram. Let me throw that up there. Corey, appreciate that. How are you, Amanda? Great to see you. Hi from Galway. Lovely. Lovely. Great to see so many people over there. But yeah, I kind of broke off there. But one of the main architects, Klaus, we're going to go back into his background, and we're going to go way back with an article here from winteroak.org. Quite detailed, but on a macro scale, those that we like to assuage, those who we like to talk about, the ruling elite, shall we say. I'm talking about the IMF. I'm talking about the World Bank. I'm, of course, talking about the World Economic Forum. Those leading figureheads aren't there by accident. They are there by design, through generational wealth, shall we say. But Klaus said he wrote a book in about the 70s, and he came up with this concept of stakeholder capitalism. Now, it doesn't go into great detail in that argument, but it is, in effect, all to do with the Great Reset. And tonight's article is going to dissect that a little bit further for us. Dar says, anyone see Dublin airport arrivals? As long as Paddy can go. What a joke. Absolutely. We're all on lockdown, but the airport is wide open. Appreciate that, Corey. Let me throw Dar's comment up there as well. Yeah, so again, we're all back in lockdown. We have to restrict our movements. Great to see Not Quite James, Amanda, and Mega Frog. How are you doing, folks? But we all have to lock down, but the airport is wide open. It's a complete nonsense. And I go back to the House of Oireachtas speaking with us. All of us, those of you watching, whether you like it or not, you are now fascists and anti-vaxxers, anti-mask wearers. And they will stand up and rise and push back against us. Anti-science, they were called. And all we do is plead with them to have the discussion. Plead with them to bring on Professor Cahill to discuss Luke O'Neill's brand new book. Buy my book, you bastards. Luke O'Neill, enjoying his stage, his time on the stage on the world platform, promoting his book this morning. I seen, and he's got all of them in there. Marital relationships, I've got that covered. Vaccination issues, I don't have that covered. But again, you get into the front stage if RTE allow you or the mainstream allow you, and you get to promote your book. Oh, Luke, aren't you so great? Debate Dolores Cohill if you have any balls about you, and if you want to discuss science. And the member in the Oireachtas that was speaking was no less a member of Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin calling us fascists. Unfucking believable. I do apologize for the cursing. I do apologize. Instagram. Not like me at all. And I wanted to touch in as well, seeing on Instagram and the TikTok generation, seeing some more murmurings on the TikTok generation, a young couple discussing, a young lady discussing her in her relationship, write the book, bro, about how her partner needed to get a test done for work. So he went along, I don't know where the facility was that he went along, but he went along, the queue was as long as your arm, out the door, all the way down the back door, stood in it for about an hour, wanted to pay the 150 to the 200 euro for the test, but didn't bother with it. Said, I'll come back another day, the queue's too long. Lo and behold, gets back 2 days later, in comes the post because he had booked the testing and it came back positive. And he didn't even have a test. So his partner's like, we're all trying to do our best. We're all trying to do the masks, do our bit in lockdown. And here's my partner going off, doesn't even do the test, and the test results come back positive. What the F is going on, she said. So I think just by the daily actions of what they're doing, that they are slowly revealing that the emperor has no clothes. The COVID-19 is less, has a less mortality rate than the common cold. But we're anti-science. We're the anti-vaxxers. We're not anti-vaccination. We are vaccine safety aware. Vaccinations work, and they have their place. You want to insert a small touch, a weakened strain of the pathogen, whatever ails you, and you want to put the antibodies into the body so that the body, the immune system can mimic them and theoretically giving you lifelong immunity. Well, speak to all the young men that have mumps and that took the mumps vaccination and are now facing the prospect of being sterile, because when the mumps comes back to you as the vaccination starts to go through its waning phase, this is what's not talking about in science. I want to hear Sinn Féin representative talk to me about the waning effect of vaccinations and why these gentlemen, these young men, some 400 or 500 are going to have booster inoculations against what they didn't need to get done. The primary failure was that the vaccine wasn't even needed in the first place. So you have compounded and complicated their livelihood or their risks or their chances of producing a family because of the waning effect. So we're not anti-vaccines, we're vaccine safety aware. We want to know what the constituent parts are. What's in it? Vaccines are great. Vaccines work. Vaccines have been proven to work. What's in the vaccine? Do I want the mark of the beast? Do I want a nano dot placed on my skin like a tattoo? Mark of the beast, some will say. Didn't we go through this in World War II? Isn't this kind of like verboten? So that the new technology can come in and scan you without even having to touch you, scan you to see what your health status is, because you will have the microscopic dot on your arm. So will you be allowed to use banking? Will you be allowed transport? Will you be allowed to leave the country? Will you be allowed to leave your quarantine area? This will be all explained in this evening's article. Let's get straight into it without further ado. Telegram, have a peaceful conversation in there amongst yourselves. A couple of trolls in there earlier on. And I will make the point, one more point. The Telegram is available and you are free to join, but if there's any nonsense like I seen going on in there earlier on, I don't care if I know you. I don't care if we've worked before. For what I seen, you get the ban hammer. Same as in the live chat. Any nonsense in there, we like to keep it respectable. We like to keep it plain, easy flowing conversation. But the shit posting and the nonsense posts and the circular arguments, boom, you're gone. End of. Don't text me and look to come back One chance. And with that little slap on the wrist for the Bold Boys in the Telegram group, we carry on. Instagram, you're just going to have to put up and listen into this article, but I do have it streamed in front. And do make sure you tune in over on YouTube when I upload the show afterwards. Great to see some young friends over there. Cole, I hope you're in there. Keeping an eye on you. Hope you're doing well over there in Arizona. Okay, let me get straight into this. Klaus Schwab and his great fascist reset. We begin. We'll begin then. Born in Ravensburg in 1938, Klaus Schwab is a child of Adolf Hitler's Germany, a police state regime built on fear and violence, on brainwashing and control, on propaganda and lies, on industrialism and a eugenics, on dehumanization and the disinfection, on a chilling and grandiose vision of a new order that would last 1,000 years. Schwab seems to have dedicated his life to reinventing that nightmare and to trying to turn it into a reality, not just for Germany, but for the whole world. Worse still, in his own words, confirmed time and time again, his technocratic fascist vision is also a twisted transhumanist one, which will merge humans with machines in a curious mix of digital and analog life, which will infect our bodies with smart dust, and in which the police will apparently be able to read our brains. And as we will see, he and his accomplices are using the COVID-19 crisis to bypass democratic accountability, to override opposition, to accelerate their agenda, and to impose on the rest of humankind and against our will in what he terms the Great Reset. Schwab is not, of course, a Nazi in the classic sense, being neither a nationalist or an anti-Semite, as testified by the 1 million Dan David Prize he was awarded by Israel in 2004. But 21st century fascism has found a different political forms through which to continue its core project of reshaping humanity to suit capitalism through blatantly authoritarian means. This new fascism is today being advanced in the guise of global governance, biosecurity, the new normal, the New Deal for nature, and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Schwab, the octogenarian founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, sits at the center of this matrix-like spider on a giant web. The original fascist project in Italy and Germany was all about the merger of state and business. While communism envisages the takeover of business and industry by the government, which theoretically acts in the interests of the people, fascism was all about using the state to protect and advance the interests of the wealthy elite. Schwab was continuing this approach in a densified post-World War II context. When in 1971, he founded the European Management Forum, which held annual meetings at Davos in Switzerland. Here he promoted his ideology of stakeholder capitalism, in which businesses were brought into closer cooperation with government. Stakeholder capitalism is described by the Forbes Business magazine as the notion that a firm focuses on meeting the needs of all its stakeholders, customers, employees, partners, the community, and society as a whole. Even in the context of a particular business, it is invariably an empty label. As the Forbes article notes, it's actually what only means that, quote, firms can go on privately shoveling money to their shareholders and executives while maintaining a public front of exquisite social sensitivity and exemplary altruism. Ring any bells, ladies and gentlemen? Ring any bells? But in a general social context, the stakeholder concept is even more nefarious, discarding any idea of democracy, rule by the people, in favor of rule by corporate interests. Society is no longer regarded as a living community, but as a business whose profitability is the sole valid aim of human activity. Schwab set out his agenda back in 1971 in his book, The Modern Enterprise Management in Mechanical Engineering, where his use of the term stakeholders effectively redefined human beings not as citizens, free individuals, or members of communities, but as secondary participants in a massive commercial enterprise. The aim of each and every person's life was, quote, to achieve long-term growth and prosperity for this enterprise. In other words, to protect and increase the wealth of the capitalist elite. This all became even clearer in 1987 when Schwab renamed his European Management Forum the World Economic Forum. The WEF describes itself on its own website as, quote, the global platform for public-private cooperation, with admirers describing how it creates partnerships between businessmen, politicians, intellectuals, and other leaders of society to, quote, define, discuss, and advance key issues on the global agenda. Big wave there to Lauren Owino. The partnerships which the WEF creates are aimed at replacing democracy with a global leadership of hand-picked and unelected individuals whose duty is not to serve the public, but to impose the rule of the 1% on that public with as little interference from the rest of us as possible. In the books, Schwab writes for public consumption, he expresses himself in the two-faced cliches of corporate spin and greenwashing. The same empty terms are dished up time and time again. In Shaping the Future of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, a guide to building a better world, Schwab talks of the inclusion of stakeholders and the distribution of benefits, and of sustainable and inclusive partnerships. Where have we heard all of that before? Which will lead us all to an inclusive, sustainable, and prosperous future. Behind this bluster, the real motivation behind this stakeholder capitalism, which he was still relentlessly promoting at the World Economic Forum's 2020 Davos conference, is profit and exploitation. For instance, in his 2016 book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, Schwab writes about the Uberization of work and the consequent advantages for companies, particularly fast-growing startups in the digital economy. Quote, as human cloud platforms classify workers as self-employed, they are, for the moment, free of the requirement to pay minimum wages, employers' taxes, and social benefits. The same capitalist callousness. My apologies. Let me get back. The same capitalist callousness shines through in his attitude towards people nearing the end of their working life and in need of a well-deserved rest. Quote, aging is an economic challenge. Check it out. Aging is an economic challenge because unless retirement ages are drastically increased so that the older members of society can continue to contribute to the workforce, an economic imperative that has many economic benefits, the working age population falls at the same time as the percentage of dependent elders increases. Everything in this world is reduced to economic challenges, economic imperatives, and economic benefits for the ruling capitalist classes. The myth of progress has long been used by the 1% to persuade people to accept the technologies designed to exploit and control us. And Schwab plays on this when he declares that, quote, the Fourth Industrial Revolution represents a significant source of hope for continuing the climb in human development that has resulted in dramatic increases in quality of life for billions of people since the 1800s. He enthuses, quote, while it may not feel momentous to those of us experiencing a series of small but significant adjustments to life on a daily basis, it is not a minor change. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is a new chapter in human development, on a par with the First and Second and Third Industrial Revolutions, and once again driven by increasing availability and the interaction of a set of extraordinary technologies. But he is well aware that technology is not the ideological neutral, as some like to claim. Technologies and societies shape each other, he says. After all, technologies are tied up in how we know things, how we make decisions, and how we think about ourselves and each other. They are connected to our identities, worldviews, and potential futures. From nuclear technologies to the space race, smartphones, social media, cars, medicine, and infrastructure. The meaning of technologies makes them political. Even the concept of a developed nation implicitly rests on the adaptation or the adoption of technologies, what they mean for us economically and socially. Technology for the capitalists behind it has never been about the social good, but purely about profit. And Schwab makes it clear that the same remains true of his fourth industrial revolution. He enthuses, quote, "The fourth industrial revolution technologies are truly disruptive. They upend existing ways of sensing, calculating, organizing, acting, and delivering. They represent entirely new ways of creating value for organizations and maybe citizens." In case the meaning of creating value was not clear, he gives some examples. Quote, "Drones represent a new type of cost-cutting employee working among us and performing jobs once involved real people." And quote, "The use of ever smarter algorithms is rapidly extending employee productivity. For example, in the use of chatbots to augment and increasingly replace live chat support for customer interactions." Live chat, I hope you're not feeling too threatened over there. Dave Cunningham there, just with a quick interjection. With economy's gone, how are they going to extend? What's 7-year-olds going to be doing? So that's the project. That's the plan. They want to extend the working lifespan of people. We say 67, 60, 68. They're going to go for 70 and upwards and onwards. You will never retire. You will always be working for the beast till you are no longer required, and you can have your Logan's run, 20-minute euthanasia send-off party. Schwab goes into detail about the cost-cutting, profit-boosting marvels of his brave new world in the fourth industrial revolution. He explains, quote, "Sooner than most anticipate, the work of professions as different as lawyers, financial analysts, doctors, journalists, accountants, insurance underwriters, or librarians may partly or completely be automated. The technology is progressing so fast that Christian Hammond, co-founder of Narrative Science, a company specializing in automated narrative generation, forecast that by the mid-2020s, 90% of news could be generated by an algorithm. Most of it without any kind of human intervention, apart from the design of the algorithm, of course. It is this economic imperative that informs Schwab's enthusiasm for a revolution that is fundamentally changing the way we live, work, and relate to one another." Schwab waxes lyrically about the fourth industrial revolution, which he insists, quote, "is unlike anything humankind has experienced before." He gushes, "Consider the unlimited possibilities of having billions of people connected by mobile devices, giving rise to unprecedented processing power, storage capabilities, and knowledge access. Or think about the staggering confluence of emerging technology breakthroughs covering wide-ranging fields such as artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, 3D printing, nanotechnology, biotechnology, materials science, energy storage, and quantum computing, to name but a few. Many of these innovations are in their infancy, but they are already reaching an inflection point in their development as they build on and amplify each other in a fusion of technologies across the physical, digital, and biological worlds." He also looks forward to more online education involving the, quote, "the use of virtual and augmented reality to, quote, dramatically improve educational outcomes, to sensors installed in homes, clothes and accessories, cities, transport and energy networks, and to smart cities," where have you heard that before, "with their all-important data platforms. Quote, all things will be smart and connected to the internet," says Schwab. "And this will extend to animals as, quote, sensors wired into cattle can communicate to each other through a mobile phone network." Oh, it's so good that we have 5G with us. He loves the idea of smart cell factories, which could enable the accelerated generation of vaccines and big data technologies. These, he assures us, will deliver new and informative ways to service citizens and customers. And we will have to stop objecting to businesses profiting from harvesting and selling information about every aspect of our personal lives. Remove yourself from the system, patriots. Remove yourself from the system. Those that want to live in smart cities, have at it. But I'm getting the fuck out of Dodge. Quote, "Establishing trust in the data and algorithms used to make decisions will be vital," insists Schwab. "Citizens' concerns over privacy and establishing accountability in business and legal structures will require adjustments in thinking." At the end of the day, it is clear that all this technological excitement revolves purely around profit or, quote, value, as Schwab terms it, terms it in his 21st century corporate newspeak. Thus, blockchain technology will be fantastic and provoke, quote, an explosion in tradable assets, as all kinds of value exchange can be hosted on the blockchain. The use of distributed ledger technology, adds Schwab, could be the driving force behind massive flows of value in digital products and services, providing secure digital identities that can make new markets accessible to anyone connected to the internet. In general, the interest of the fourth industrial revolution for the ruling business elite is that it will, quote, create entirely new sources of value and give rise to ecosystems of value creation that are impossible to imagine with a mindset stuck in the third industrial revolution. The technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, rolled out via QIG, pose unprecedented threats to our freedom, as Schwab concedes. The tools of the fourth industrial revolution enable new forms of surveillance and other means of control that run counter to healthy, open societies. But this does not stop him presenting them in a positive light, as when he declares that public crime is likely to decrease due to the convergence of sensors, cameras, AI, and facial recognition software. He describes with some relish how these technologies can intrude into the hitherto private space of our minds, reading our thoughts and influencing our behavior. Schwab predicts, quote, as capabilities in this new area improve, the temptation for law enforcement agencies and courts to use techniques to determine the likelihood of criminal activity, that's criminal thought or pre-crime thought to you and me, to assess the guilt or even possible retrieve memories directly from people's brains will increase. Even crossing a national border might one day involve a detailed brain scan to assess an individual's security risk. There are times when the World Economic Forum chief gets carried away by his passion for a sci-fi future in which long-distance human space travel and nuclear fusion are commonplace, and in which the next trending business model might involve someone trading access to his or her thoughts for a time, saving option of typing a social media post by thought alone. Talk of space tourism under the title The Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Final Frontier is almost funny, as is his suggestion that, quote, a world full of drones offers a world full of possibilities for the ruling elite, I would hasten to add. But the further the reader progresses into the world depicted in Schwab's books, the less of a laughing matter it all seems. The truth is that this highly influential figure at the center of the new global order currently being established is an out-and-out transhumanist who dreams of an end to natural, healthy human life and community. Schwab repeats this message time and time again, as if to be sure we have been duly warned. Quote, the mind-boggling innovations triggered by the fourth industrial revolution, from biotechnology to AI, are redefining what it means to be human, he writes. The future will challenge our understanding of what it means to be human from both a biological and a social standpoint. Already, advances in neurotechnologies and biotechnologies are forcing us to question what it means to be human. He spells it out in more detail in Shaping the Future for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies will not stop at becoming part of the physical world around us. They will become part of us. Indeed, some of us already feel that our smartphones have become an extension of ourselves. Today's external devices, from wearable computers to virtual reality headsets, will almost certainly become implantable in our bodies and brains. Exoskeletons, prosthetics will increase our physical power, while advances in neurotechnology enhance our cognitive abilities. We will become better able to manipulate our own genes and those of our children. These developments raise profound questions. Where do we draw the line between human and machine? What does it mean to be human? There's a lovely little face there. You won't see that over there on Instagram. A whole section of this book is devoted to the theme, quote, altering the human being. Here, he drools over the ability of new technologies to literally become part of us, and evoke a cyborg future involving curious mixes of digital and analog life that will redefine our very natures. He writes, these technologies will operate within our own biology and change how we interface with the world. They are capable of crossing boundaries of body and mind, enhancing our physical abilities, and even having a lasting impact on life itself. No violation seems to go too far for Schwab, who dreams of active implantable microchips that break the skin barrier of our bodies, smart tattoos, biological computing, and custom designed organisms. I think I just mentioned that tattoo as part of the vaccine rollout, that you will have the mark of the beast. He is delighted to report that sensors, memory switches, and circuits can be encoded in common human gut bacteria that, quote, smart dust, arrays of full computers with antennae, each much smaller than a grain of sand, can now organize themselves inside the body, and that implanted devices will likely also help to communicate thoughts, normally expressed verbally through a built-in smartphone, and potentially unexpressed thoughts or moods by reading brainwaves and other signals. Synthetic biology is on the horizon in Schwab's Fourth Industrial Revolution world, giving the technocratic capitalist rulers of the world the ability to customize organisms by writing DNA. The idea of neurotechnologies in which humans will have fully artificial memories implanted in the brain is enough to make some of us feel faintly sick, as is the prospect of connecting our brains to VR, virtual reality, through cortical modems and implants or nanobots. It is of little comfort to learn that this is all, of course, in the greater interest of capitalist profiteering, since it heralds new industries and systems for value creation and represents an opportunity to create entire new systems of value in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And what about the bioprinting of organic tissues, or the suggestion that animals could potentially be engineered to produce pharmaceuticals and other forms of treatment? Ethical objections, anyone? It's all evidently good for Schwab, who is happy to announce the day when cows are engineered to produce its milk, a blood-clotting element which hemophiliacs lack, is not far off. Researchers have already started to engineer the genomes of pigs with the goal of growing organs suitable for human transplantation. It gets even more disturbing. Ever since the sinister eugenics program of the Nazi Germany into which Schwab was born, this science has been deemed beyond the pale by human society. But now, however, he evidently feels eugenics is due a revival, announcing with regard to genetic editing, quote, that it is now far easier to manipulate with precision the human genome with viable embryos means that we are likely to see the advent of designer babies in the future who possess particular traits or who are resistant to a specific disease. In the notorious 2002 transhumanist treatise, I, Cyborg, Kevin Warwick predicts, quote, humans will be able to evolve by harnessing the superintelligence and extra abilities offered by the machines of the future, by joining with them. All this points to the development of a new human species, known in the science fiction world as cyborgs. It doesn't mean that everyone has to become a cyborg. If you are happy with your state as a human, then so be it. You can remain as you are. But be warned, just as we humans split from our chimpanzee cousins years ago, so cyborgs will split from humans. Those who remain as humans are likely to become a subspecies. They will effectively be the chimpanzees of the future. Schwab seems to be hinting at the same future of a superior, enhanced, artificial, transhuman elite separating from the natural-born rabble in this particularly damning passage from the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Quote, we are at the threshold of a radical systematic change that requires human beings to adapt continuously. As a result, we may witness an increasing degree of polarization in the world, marked by those who embrace change versus those who resist it. Quote, thus gives rise to an inequality that goes beyond the societal one described earlier. This ontological inequality will separate those who adapt from those who resist. The material winners and losers in all senses of the words. The winners may benefit from some form of radical human improvement generated by certain segments of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, such as genetic engineering, from which the losers will be deprived the risks, creating class conflicts and other clashes unlike anything we have seen before. Schwab was already talking about a great transformation back in 2016 and is clearly determined to do everything in his not inconsiderable power to bring about this eugenics-inspired transhumanist world of artifice, surveillance and control and exponential profit. But as revealed by his reference above to class conflicts, he is clearly worried by the possibility of societal resistance and how to advance if technologies receive a great deal of resistance from the public. Schwab's annual WEF shindigs at Davos have long been met by anti-capitalist protests, and despite the current paralysis of the radical left, he is well aware of the possibility of renewed and perhaps broader opposition to his project, with the risk of resentment, fear, and political backlash. In his most recent book, he provides a historical context, noting that anti-globalization was strong in the run-up to 1914 and up to 1918, then less so during the 20s, but it reignited in the 1930s and as a result of the Great Depression. He notes that in the early 2000s, the political and societal backlash against globalization relentlessly gained strength. Says that social unrest has been widespread across the world in the past 2 years, citing that the Gilets Jaunes in France, among other movements, and invokes the somber scenario that the same thing could happen again. So how is an honest technocrat supposed to roll out his preferred future for the world without the agreement of the global public? How can Schwab and his billionaire friends impose their favorite society on the rest of us? One answer is relentless brainwashing propaganda churned out by the mass media and academia owned by the 1% elite, what they like to call a narrative. For Schwab, the reluctance of the majority of humankind to leap aboard his Fourth Industrial Revolution reflects the tragedy that the world lacks a consistent, positive, and common narrative that outlines the opportunities and challenges of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, a narrative that is essential if we are to empower a diverse set of individuals and communities and avoid a popular backlash against the fundamental changes underway. He adds, it is therefore critical that we invest in attention and energy in multi-stakeholder cooperation across academic, social, political, and national and industry boundaries. These interactions and collaborations are needed to create positive, common, hope-filled narratives, enabling individuals and groups from all parts of the world to participate in and benefit from the ongoing transformations. One of these narratives whitewashes the reason for which Fourth Industrial Revolution technology needs to be installed everywhere in the world as soon as possible. Hence, we get locked down and then everything is rolled up. 5G just came up while we were all locked indoors. Schwab is frustrated that, quote, more than half of the world's population, around 3.9 billion people, still cannot access the internet, with 85% of the population of developing countries remaining offline, therefore out of reach, as compared to the 22% in the developed world. The actual aim of the Fourth Industrial Revolution is to exploit these populations for profit via global techno-imperialism. But of course, that cannot be stated in the propaganda narrative required to sell the plan. Instead, their mission has to be represented, as Schwab himself does, as a bid to develop technologies and systems that serve to distribute economic and social values such as income, opportunity, and liberty to all the stakeholders. Can you see what's happening? He piously postures as a guardian of woke liberal values, declaring, quote, thinking inclusively goes beyond thinking about poverty or marginalized communities simply as an aberration, something that we can solve. It forces us to realize that our privileges are located on the same map as their suffering. It moves beyond income and entitlements, though these remain important. Instead, the inclusion of stakeholders and the distribution of benefits expand freedoms for all. The same technique of a fake narrative designed to fool good-thinking citizens into supporting an imperialist capitalist scheme has been used extensively with regard to climate change. Schwab is a great fan of Greta Thunberg, of course, who had barely stood up from the pavement after her one-girl protest in Stockholm before being whisked off to address the World Economic Forum at Davos. He is also a supporter of the proposed global New Deal for nature, particularly via Voice for the Planet, which was launched at the WEF Davos in 2019 by the Global Shapers, a youth grooming organization created by Schwab in 2011 and aptly described by investigative journalist Cory Morningstar as, quote, a grotesque display of corporate malfeasance disguised as good, end quote. In his 2020 book, Schwab actually lays out the way that fake youth activism is being used to advance his capitalist aims. He writes in a remarkably frank passage, quote, youth activism is increasing worldwide, being revolutionized by social media that increases mobilization to an extent that would have been impossible before. It takes many different forms, ranging from non-institutionalized political participation to demonstrations and protests, and addresses issues as diverse as climate change, economic reforms, gender equality, and LGBTQP rights. The young generation is firmly at the vanguard of social change. There is little doubt that it will be the catalyst for a change. I beg your pardon. For change and a source of critical momentum for the Great Reset. In fact, of course, the ultra-industrial future proposed by Schwab is anything other than green. It's not nature he's interested in, but natural capital and incentivizing investment in green and social frontier markets. Pollution means profit, and environmental crisis is just another business opportunity, as he details in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Quote, in this revolutionary new industrial system, carbon dioxide turns from a greenhouse pollutant into an asset, and the economics of carbon capture and storage move from being cost as well as pollution sinks to becoming profitable carbon capture and use production facilities. Even more important, it will help companies, governments, and citizens to become more aware of and engage with the regenerative uses of natural capital to guide sustainable production and consumption and give space for biodiversity to recover in threatened areas. Schwab's solutions to the heartbreaking damage inflicted on our natural world by industrial capitalism involve more of the same poison, except worse. Geoengineering is one of his favorites. Proposals include installing giant mirrors in the stratosphere to deflect the sun's rays, chemically seeding the atmosphere in increased rainfall, and the deployment of large machines to remove carbon dioxide from the air. And he adds, new approaches are currently being imagined through the combination of Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies such as nanoparticulates and other advancements in materials. Quick little aside from carbon pollutants. The biggest pollutant in our atmosphere is oxygen. That's also considered a pollutant. But the fact that we here in Ireland particularly have to pay carbon pollutant or carbon taxes is an absolute nonsense. We here, through our ground energy, we store a hell of a lot more carbon than we produce. Anyway, that's for another conversation. Like all the businesses and pro-capitalists NGOs backing the threatened New Deal for nature, Schwab is utterly, profoundly ungreen. For him, the ultimate possibility of clean and sustainable energy includes nuclear fusion, and he looks forward to the day when satellites will blanket the planet with communication pathways that could help connect the more than 4 billion people still lacking online access. Schwab also very much regrets all the red tape preventing the unhindered onward march of genetically modified food, warning that, quote, the global food security will only be achieved, however, if regulations on genetically modified foods are adapted to reflect the reality that gene editing offers a precise, efficient, and safe method of improving crops. That's lab meat. That's laboratory meat to you and me. They want us to eat lab meat. The new order envisaged by Schwab will embrace the entire world, and so global governance is required in order to impose it, as he repeatedly states. How many of our politicians have we heard utter the word, a new global governance is required. All of them, from both sides of the political party, from Sinn Féin, from Fine Gael, from Fianna Fáil, they've all mentioned we need global cooperation, we need a new global governance. So they are all pushing the fourth industrial revolution. That is where they want us to head. That is why we must resist it. It is antithetical to anything that is human. We carry on. His preferred future will only become about through improvised global governance, he insists. Some form of effective global governance is needed. The problem we have today is that of a possible global order deficit, he claims, adding in probably that the World Health Organization is, quote, saddled with limited and dwindling resources. What he is really saying is that the fourth industrial revolution, Great Reset society, will only function if it is imposed simultaneously everywhere on the planet. Otherwise, quote, we will become paralyzed in our attempts to address and respond to global challenges. He admits, in a nutshell, global government is the nexus of all these other issues. This all-englobing empire, which very much frowns on the idea of any particular population democratically deciding to take another path, putting these nations at risk of becoming the laggards of the new digital economy, warns Schwab. Any sense of autonomy and grassroots belonging is regarded as a threat from Schwab's imperialist perspective and is due to be eradicated under the fourth industrial revolution. He writes, individuals used to identify their lives most closely with a place, an ethnic group, a particular culture, or even a language. The advent of online engagement and increased exposure to ideas from other cultures means that identities are now more fungible than previously. Thanks to the combination of historical migration patterns and low-cost connectivity, family structures are being redefined. Genuine democracy essentially falls into the same category for Schwab. He knows that most people will not willingly go along with plans to destroy their lives and enslave them to a global techno-fascist system of exploitation. So giving them a say in the matter is simply not an option. This is why the stakeholder concept has been so important for Schwab's project. As discussed above, this is the negation of democracy, which it emphasizes instead on reaching out across stakeholder groups for solution building. If the public, the people, are included in this process, it is only at a superficial level. The agenda has already been presupposed and the decisions are pre-made behind the scenes. Schwab effectively admits as much when he writes, we must re-establish a dialogue among all stakeholders to ensure mutual understanding that further builds a culture of trust among regulators, non-governmental organizations, professionals, and scientists. Boom! The whole dirty little cadre spoken about there now. We must reiterate that, and I think for us, that is for us here in Ireland. These are the culture warriors, or the threats to democracy here in Ireland that we must usurp and underfund and defund and dismantle them. We must re-establish the dialogue between all stakeholders to ensure mutual understanding that further builds of a culture of trust among regulators, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and professionals and scientists. The public must also be considered because it must participate in the democratic shaping of biotechnological developments that affect society, individuals, and cultures. Do you really think he's going to give us a vote? So the public must also be considered as an afterthought, not even directly consulted, just considered. And the role of the people, the demos, will merely be to participate in the shaping of biotechnological developments. The possibility of the public actually rejecting the very idea of biotechnological developments has been entirely removed thanks to the deliberately inbuilt assumptions of the stakeholder formula. The same message is implied in the heading of Schwab's conclusion to shaping the future of the fourth industrial revolution. Quote, what you can do to shape the fourth industrial revolution. The techno-tyranny cannot challenged or be stopped, merely shaped. Schwab uses the term system leadership to describe the profoundly anti-democratic way in which the 1% imposes its agenda on all of us without giving us the chance to say no. He writes, systems leadership is about cultivating a shared vision for change, working together with all stakeholders of global society, and then acting on it to change how the system delivers its benefits and to whom. System leadership requires action from all stakeholders, including individuals, businesses, executives, social influencers, and policymakers. He refers to this full spectrum top-down control as, quote, the system management of human existence, although others might prefer the term totalitarianism. One of the distinguishing features of historical fascism in Italy and Germany was its impatience with the inconvenient restraints imposed on the ruling class, the nation in fascist language, by democracy and political liberalism. All of this had to be swept out of the way to allow a blitzkrieg of accelerated modernization. We see the same spirit resurging in Schwab's calls for agile governance, in which he claims that the pace of technological development and a number of characteristics of technologies render previous policymaking cycles and processes inadequate. He writes, the idea of reforming governance models to cope with new technologies is not new, but the urgency of doing so is far greater in light of the power of today's emerging technologies. The concept of agile governance seeks to match the nimbleness, fluidity, flexibility, and adaptiveness of technologies themselves in the private sector actors adopting them. The phrase, quote, reforming governance models to cope with new technologies, quote, really gives the game away here. As under fascism, social structures must be reinvented so as to accommodate the requirements of capitalism and its profit-increasing technologies. Schwab explains that his, quote, agile governance would involve creating so-called policy labs, protected spaces within government with an explicit mandate to experiment with new methods of policy development by using agile principles, and, quote, encouraging collaborations between governments and businesses to create developatory sandboxes and experimental testbeds to develop regulations using iterative, cross-sectoral, and flexible approaches. For Schwab, the role of the state is to advance capitalist aims, not to hold them up to any form of scrutiny. While he is all in favor of the state's role in enabling a corporate takeover of our lives, he is less keen about its regulatory function, which might slow down the inflow of profit into private hands. And so he envisages the, quote, the development of ecosystems of private regulators competing in markets. In his 2018 book, Schwab discusses the problem of pesky regulations and how to best overcome these limits in the context of data and privacy. He comes up with the suggestion of public-private data sharing agreements that break glass in the case of an emergency. These come into play only under pre-agreed emergency circumstances, such as a pandemic, and can help to reduce delays and improve the coordination of first responders, temporarily allowing data sharing that would be illegal under normal circumstances. Funnily enough, 2 years later, there was indeed a pandemic, and these pre-agreed emergency circumstances became a reality. This shouldn't have been too much of a surprise for Schwab, since his WEF had co-hosted the infamous Event 201 conference in October 2019, which modeled a fictional coronavirus pandemic. And he wasted little time in bringing out a new book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, co-authored with Thierry Mallaré, who runs something called the Monthly Barometer, a succinct predictive analysis provided to private investors, global CEOs, and opinion and decision makers. Published in July 2020, the book sets out to advance conjectures and ideas about what the post-pandemic world might and perhaps should look like. Schwab and Mallaré admit that the COVID-19 is, quote, one of the least deadly pandemics the world has experienced over the last 2,000 years, end quote, adding that the consequences of COVID-19 in terms of health and mortality will be mild compared to previous pandemics. They add, it does not constitute an existential threat or a shock that will leave its imprint on the world's population for decades. Yet, incredibly, this, quote, mild illness is simultaneously presented as the excuse for unprecedented social change under the banner of, quote, the Great Reset. And although they explicitly declare that COVID-19 does not constitute a major, quote, shock, the authors repeatedly deploy the same term to describe the broader impact of the crisis. Schwab and Mallory place COVID-19 in a long tradition of events which have facilitated sudden and significant changes to our societies. They specifically invoke the Second World War. Quote, World War II was the quintessential transformational war, triggering not only fundamental changes to the global order and the global economy, but also entailing radical shifts in social attitudes and beliefs that were eventually paved the way for radically new policies and social contract provisions, like women joining the workforce before becoming voters. There are obviously fundamental dissimilarities between a pandemic and a war that we will consider in some detail in the following pages, but the magnitude of their transformative power is comparable. Both have the potential to be transformative crises of previously unimaginable proportions. They also join many contemporary, quote, conspiracy theorists in making a direct comparison between COVID-19 and 9/11. This is what happened after the terrorist attack of September 11, 2001. All around the world, new security measures like employing widespread cameras, requiring electronic ID cards, and logging employees or visitors in and out became the norm. At that time, these new measures were deemed extreme, but today they are used everywhere and considered normal. When any tyrant declares the right to rule over a population without taking their views into account, they like to justify their dictatorship with the claim that they are morally entitled to do so because they are enlightened. The same is true of COVID-fueled tyranny of Schwab's Great Reset, which the book categorizes as enlightened leadership. Adding, some leaders and decision makers who are already at the forefront of the fight against climate change may want to take advantage of the shock inflicted by the pandemic to implement long-lasting and wider environmental changes. They will, in effect, make good use of the pandemic by not letting the crisis go to waste. The global capitalist ruling elite have certainly been doing their best to take advantage of the shock inflicted by the panic, assuring us all since the very earliest days of the outbreak that, for some unfathomable reason, nothing in our lives could ever be the same again. Schwab and Mallory are inevitably enthusiastic in their use of the new normal framing, despite their admission that the virus was only ever mild. It is our defining moment, they crow. Many things will change forever. A new world will emerge. The societal upheaval unleashed by COVID-19 will last for years and possibly generations. Many of us are pondering when things will return to normal. The short response is never. They even go as far as proposing a new historical separation between the pre-pandemic era and the post-pandemic world. They write, radical changes of such consequence are coming that some pundits have referred to a before coronavirus BC and after coronavirus AC era. We will continue to be surprised by both the rapidity and unexpected nature of these changes as they conflate with each other. They will provoke second, third, fourth, and more order consequences, cascading effects, and unforeseen outcomes. In so doing, they will shape a new normal, radically different from the one we will be progressively leaving behind. Many of our beliefs and assumptions about the world could or should look like will be shattered in the process. Back in 2016, Schwab was looking ahead to the new ways of using technology to change behavior and predicting the scale and breadth of unfolding technological revolution will usher in economic, social, and cultural changes of such phenomenal proportions that they are almost impossible to envisage. One way in which he had hoped his technocratic agenda would be advanced was, as we have noted, through the phony solutions to climate change proposed by fake green capitalists. Under the title Environmental Reset, Schwab and Mallory state, at first glance, the pandemic and the environment might seem, to be only distantly related cousins, but they are much closer and more intertwined than we think. One of the connections is that both the climate and virus crises have been used by the World Economic Forum and their like to push their agenda of global governance. As Schwab and his co-author put it, they are global in nature and therefore can be properly addressed in a globally coordinated fashion. Another link is that the way the post-pandemic economy and the green economy involve massive profits for largely the same sectors of businesses. We've had to let Instagram go there. My apologies, Instagram, if you're tuning in afterwards. It just seems to have timed out, but unfortunately, we crack on. Nearly there, live chat. Nearly there, gang. Last few minutes. I can't believe I've done an hour. Unbelievable. COVID-19 has evidently been great news for the capitalists hoping to cash in on environmental destruction. With Schwab and Mallory reporting, the conviction that ESG strategies benefited from the pandemic are most likely to benefit further is corroborated by various surveys and reports. Earlier data shows the sustainability sector outperformed conventional funds during the first quarter of 2020. The capitalist sharks of so-called sustainability sector are rubbing their hands together with a glee of the prospect of all the money they stand to make from the COVID pretexted great fascist reset, in which the state is instrumentalized to fund their hypercritical profiteering. Note Schwab and Mallory, the key to crowding private capital into a new sources of nature-positive economic value will be to shift key policy levers and public finance incentives as part of a wider economic reset. A policy paper prepared by the Systemique in collaboration with the World Economic Forum estimates that building the nature-positive economy could represent more than 10 trillion by the year 2030. Resetting the environment should not be seen as a cost, but rather as an investment that will generate economic activity and employment opportunities. Given the intertwining of climate and COVID crisis set out by Schwab, we might speculate that the original plan was to push through the new normal reset on the back of the climate crisis. But evidently, all that publicity for Greta Thunberg and big business-backed Extinction Rebellion did not whip up enough public panic to justify such measures. COVID-19 serves of Schwab's purposes perfectly, as the immediate urgency it presents allows the whole process to be speeded up and rushed through without due scrutiny. This crucial difference between the respective time horizons of a pandemic and that of a climate change than nature loss means that a pandemic risks require immediate action that will be followed by a rapid result, while climate change and nature loss also require immediate action. But the result, or future reward in the jargon of the economists, will only follow with a certain time lag. For Schwab and his friends, COVID-19 is the great accelerator of everything that they have been waiting to foist upon us for years. And he and Mallory say the pandemic is clearly exasperating and accelerating geopolitical trends that were already apparent before the crisis erupted. The pandemic will mark a turning point by accelerating this transition. It has crystallized the issue and made a return to the pre-pandemic status quo impossible. They can barely conceal their delight at the direction society is now taking. The pandemic will accelerate innovation even more, catalyzing technological changes already underway, comparable to the exasperation effect it had on underlying global and domestic issues, and the turbocharging any digital business or the digital dimension of any businesses. With the pandemic, the digital transformation that so many analysts have been referring to for years without being exactly sure what it meant has found its catalyst. One major effect of confinement will be the expansion and progression of the digital world in a decisive and often permanent manner. In April 2020, several tech leaders observed how quickly and radically the necessities created by the health crisis had precipitated the adoption of a wide range of technologies. In the space of just 1 month, it appeared that many companies in terms of tech take-up fast-forwarded by several years. Fate is obviously smiling on Klaus Schwab, as this COVID-19 crisis has, happily, succeeded in advancing pretty much every aspect of the agenda he has been promoting over the decades. Thus, he and Mallory report with satisfaction that the pandemic will fast-forward the adoption of automation in the workplace and the introduction of more robots in our personal and professional lives. Lockdowns across the world have, needlessly to say, provided a big financial boost to those businesses offering online shopping. The authors recount consumers need products, and if they can't shop, they will inevitably resort to purchasing them online. As the habit kicks in, people who will never have shopped online before will become comfortable with doing so, while people who were part time online shoppers before will presumably rely on it more. This is made evident during the lockdowns. In the US, Amazon and Walmart hired a combination of 250,000 workers to keep up within the increase in demand and built massive infrastructure to deliver online. This accelerating growth of e commerce means that the giants of the online retail industry are likely to emerge from the crisis even stronger than they were in the pre pandemic era. They add, as more diverse things and services are brought to us via our mobiles and computers, companies in sectors as disparate as e commerce, contactless operations, digital content, robots, and drone deliveries, to name just a few, will thrive. It is not by accident that firms like Alibaba, Amazon, Netflix, or Zoom emerged as winners from the lockdowns. By way of corollary, we might suggest that it is not by accident that governments, which have been captured and controlled by big businesses, thanks to the likes of the World Economic Forum, have imposed a new reality, COVE, under which big businesses are the winners. The COVID-inspired good news never stops for all the business sectors which stand to benefit from the fourth industrial repression. The pandemic may prove to be a boon for online education, Schwab and Mallory report. In Asia, the shift to online education is particularly notable, with a sharp increase in students' digital enrollments, much higher valuation for online education businesses, and more capital available for ed-tech startups. In the summer of 2020, the direction of the trend seems clear. The world of education, like for so many other industries, will become partially virtual. Online sports have taken off. For a while, social distancing may constrain the practice of certain sports, which will in turn benefit the ever more powerful expansion of esports. Tech and digital are never far away. There is similar news from the banking sector. Online banking interactions have risen to 90% during the crisis, from 10%, with no drop-off in quality and an increase in compliance. The COVID-inspired move into online activity obviously benefits big tech, who are making enormous profits out of the crisis, as the author describes. The combined market value of the leading tech companies hit record after record during the lockdowns, even rising back above levels before the outbreak started. This phenomenon is unlikely to abate anytime soon. Quite the opposite. But it is also good news for all businesses involved who no longer have to pay human beings to work for them. Automation is and has always been about saving costs and thus boosting profits for the capitalist elite. The culture of the fascist new normal will also provide lucrative spin-off benefits for particular business sectors, such as the packing industry, explained Schwab and Mallory. The pandemic will certainly heighten our focus on hygiene. A new obsession with cleanliness will particularly entail the creation of new forms of packaging. We will be encouraged not to touch the products we buy. Simple pleasures like smelling a melon or squeezing a fruit will be frowned upon and may even become a thing of the past. The authors also described that this sounds very much like a technocratic profit-related agenda behind the social distancing, which has been such a key element of the COVID reset. They write, in one form or another, social and physical distancing measures are likely to persist after the pandemic itself subsides, justifying the decision in many companies from different industries to accelerate automation. After a while, the enduring concerns about technological unemployment will recede as societies emphasize the need to restructure the workplace in a way that minimizes close human contact. Indeed, automation technologies are particularly well suited to a world in which human beings can't get too close to each other or are willing to reduce their interactions. Our lingering and possibly lasting fear of being infected with a virus, COVID-19 or another, will thus speed the relentless march of automation, particularly in the field most susceptible to automation. As previously mentioned, Schwab has long been frustrated by all those tiresome regulations which stop capitalists from making as much money as they would like to. By focusing on economically irrelevant concerns such as safety and the well-being of human beings. But hooray! The COVID crisis has provided the perfect excuse for doing away with great swaths of these outmoded impediments to prosperity and growth. One area in which meddlesome red tape is being abandoned is health. Why would any right-minded stakeholder imagine that any particular obligation for care and diligence should be allowed to impinge on the profitability of this particular business sector? Schwab and Mallory are overjoyed to note that the telemedicine will benefit considerably from the COVID emergency. The necessity to address the pandemic with any means available, plus during the outbreak, the need to protect health workers by allowing them to work remotely, removes some of the regulatory and legislative impediments related to the adaptation of telemedicine. The ditching of regulations is a general phenomenon under the new normal global regime, as Schwab and Mallory relate. To date, global governments have often slowed the pace of adaptation of new technologies by lengthy ponderings about the best regulatory framework should look like. But as the example of telemedicine and drone delivery is now showing, a dramatic acceleration forced by necessity is possible. I know I'm craggling on here, but we're nearly towards the end, and it's gone well over what I expected it to be, but we got to get through it. During a showing and a dramatic acceleration forced by the necessity, it's possible. During lockdowns, a quasi-global relaxation of regulation that had previously hampered progress in domains where the technology had been available for years suddenly happened because there was no better or other choice available. What was until recently unthinkable suddenly became possible. New regulations will stay in place. They add the current imperative to propel, no matter what, the contactless economy, and the subsequent willingness of regulators to speed it up means that there are no holds barred. No holds barred makes no mistake. This is the language adopted by capitalism when it abandons its pretense at liberal democracy and switches into full-on fascist mode. It is clear from Schwab and the Mallory's work that a fascistic merging of state and business to the advantage of the latter underpins their great reset. Phenomenal sums of money have been transferred from the public purse into the bulging pockets of the 1% since the very start of the COVID crisis. As they acknowledge, in April 2020, just as the pandemic began to engulf the world, governments across the globe had announced stimulus programs amounting to several $1 trillion, as if 8 or 9 Marshall Plans had been put into place almost simultaneously. They continue. COVID-19 has rewritten many of the rules of the game between the public and private sectors. The malevolent or otherwise greater intrusion of governments in the life of companies and the conduct of their businesses will be country and industry dependent, therefore taking many different guises. Measures that will have seemed inconceivable prior to the pandemic may well become standard around the world as governments try to prevent economic recession from turning into a catastrophic depression. Increasingly, there will be calls for government to act as a prayer of last resort to prevent or stem the spate of mass layoffs and businesses' destruction triggered by the pandemic. All these changes are altering the rules of the economic and monetary policy game. Schwab and his fellow author welcome the prospect of increased state powers being used to prop up big businesses' profiteering. They write, one of the greatest lessons of the past 5 centuries in Europe and America is this: acute crises contribute to the boosting the power of the state. It's always been the case, and there is no reason why it should be different with the COVID-19 pandemic. And they added, looking to the future, governments will most likely, but with different degree of intensity, decide that it's in best interest of society to rewrite some of the rules of the game and permanently increase their role. The idea of rewriting the rules of the game is again very reminiscent of fascist language, as of course is the idea of permanently increasing the role of the state in helping the private sector. Indeed, it is worth comparing Schwab's position on this issue with that of Italian fascist dictator Benito Mussolini, who responded to economic crisis in 1931 by launching a special emergency body to aid businesses. He declared that this was a means of energetically driving the Italian economy towards its corporate phase, which is to say a system which fundamentally respects private property and initiative, but ties them tightly to the state, which alone can protect, control, and nourish them. Suspicions about fascistic nature of Schwab's Great Reset are confirmed, of course, by the police state measures that have been rolled out across the world to ensure compliance with emergency COVID measures. The sheer brute force that never lies far beneath the surface of the capitalist system becomes increasingly visible when it enters its fascistic stage. And this is very much in evidence in Schwab and Mallaray's book. The word force is deployed time and time again in the context of COVID-19. Sometimes this is in a business context, as with statements that, quote, COVID-19 has forced all of the banks to accelerate a digital transformation that is now here to stay. COVID or that, the micro reset will force every company in every industry to experiment new ways of doing business, working, and operating. But sometimes it is applied directly to human beings or consumers, as Schwab and his ilk prefer to think of us. During the lockdowns, many consumers, previously reluctant to rely too heavily on digital applications and services, were forced to change their habits almost overnight. Watching movies online instead of going to the cinema, having meals delivered instead of going out to restaurants, talking to friends remotely instead of meeting them in the flesh, talking to colleagues on a screen instead of chit-chatting at the coffee machine, exercising online instead of going to the gym, and so on. Many of the tech behaviors that we're forced to adopt during confinement will through familiarity become more natural. As social and physical distancing persist, excuse me, frog in the throat, ribbit, keck. Relying more on digital platforms to communicate or work or seek advice or sometimes or order something will, little by little, gain ground on formerly ingrained habits. Under a fascist system, individuals are not offered the choice as to whether they want to comply with its demands or not, as Schwab and Malloray make quite clear regarding so-called contact tracing. No voluntary contact tracing app will work if people are unwilling to provide their own personal data to the governmental agency that monitors the system. If any individual refuses to download the app and therefore to withhold information about a possible infection, movements and contacts, everyone will be adversely affected. This, they reflect, is another great advantage of the COVID crisis over the environmental one, which might have been used to impose their new normal. While for a pandemic, a majority of citizens will tend to agree with the necessity to impose coercive measures, they will resist constraining policies in the case of environmental risks where the evidence can be disputed. These coercive measures, which are all expected to go along with, will of course involve unimaginable levels of fascistic surveillance of our lives, particularly in our role as wage slaves. Write Schwab and Malloray, the corporate move will be towards greater surveillance. For better or for worse, companies will be watching and sometimes recording what their workforce does. The trend could take many different forms, from measuring body temperatures with thermal cameras to monitoring via an app how an employee comply with social distancing. Coercive measures of one kind or another are likely to be used to force people to take COVID vaccines currently being lined up. Schwab is deeply connected to that world, being on a first-name basis with Bill Gates and having been hailed by Big Pharma, the mainstay Henry McKinnell, chairman and CEO of Pfizer Inc., as a person truly dedicated to a truly noble cause. So it is not surprising that he insists with Malloray that a full return to normal cannot be envisaged before a vaccine is available. He adds, the next hurdle is the political challenge of vaccinating enough people worldwide, and we are collectively as strong as the weakest link with a high enough compliance rate despite the rise of anti-vaxxers. Anti-vaxxers thus join Schwab's list of threats to his project, along with anti-globalization and anti-capitalist protesters. The Gilles Jaunes and all those engaged in class conflicts, societal resistance, and political backlash. The majority of the world's population have already been excluded from decision-making processes by the lack of democracy, which Schwab wants to accentuate through his stakeholderist corporate domination, his agile governance, his totalitarian system management of human existence. But how does he envisage dealing with this somber scenario of people rising up against this great new normalist reset and his transhumanist fourth industrial revolution? What degree of, quote, force and coercive measures would he be prepared to accept in order to ensure the dawning of his technocratic new age? This question is a chilling one, but we should also bear in mind the historical example of the 20th century regime into which Schwab was born. Hitler's new Nazi normal was meant to last for 1,000 years, but came crashing down 988 years ahead of target. Just because Hitler said with all the confidence of power that his Reich would last for a millennium, this didn't mean that it was so. Just because Klaus Schwab and Thierry Malray and their friends say that we are now entering the fourth industrial revolution and our world will be changed forever, this doesn't mean that it is so. We don't have to accept their new normal. We don't have to go along with their fear-mongering, and we don't have to take their vaccines. We don't have to let them implant us with smartphones or edit our DNA, and we don't have to walk muzzled and submissive straight into their transhumanist hell. We can denounce their lies, expose their agenda, refuse their narrative, refuse their toxic ideology, and resist their fascism. Klaus Schwab is not a good, but a human being. Klaus Schwab is not a god, but a human being, just one elderly man. And those he works with, the global capitalist elite, are fewer in number. Their aims are not the aims of the vast majority of humankind. Their transhumanist vision is repulsive to nearly everyone outside of their little circle, and they do not have consent for their technocratic dictatorship that they are trying to impose on us. That, after all, is why they have to go to such lengths to force it upon us under the false flag of fighting a virus. They understand that without the emergency justification, we were never going to go along with their warped scheme. They are scared of our potential power because they know that if we stand up, we will defeat them. We can bring their project crashing down before it has even properly started. We are the people. We are the 99%. And together we can grab back our freedom from the deadly jaws of this fascist machine. I went well and truly well over the top of the time allotted. An hour and 20 minutes, made for a deep, long read. We can go through it and we can chew the fat on it at another time. But it's an hour and 20 minutes. I am going to stick it up on YouTube. YouTube, have at it. But we at the very end of it there, the conclusion to it all, and I've said it numerous times. I'm going for an hour and a half. We are at war. It is not the war that we are accustomed to. It is not a war that you or I or any of us have trained for, but it is a war all the same. It is a war on our minds. And if our minds are coerced into accepting this new normal, as it's being rolled out, as the author says, the longer it progresses on, the more ingrained it becomes. Those of us who are refusing to comply, those dissenters, pat yourself on the back. You are the defenders of humankind. You are the defender of man, woman, and child. We must all stand up to this tyranny, and we must all push back, each in our own little way. But we must seed enough thought that we must plant the seeds, and we must fight back through every generation. We have now entered into a different phase. We have passed an inflection point where the world is being coerced into accepting that there is a virus of such magnitude that we must give up our whole ways of being. No, we must fight back, and we must fight back with every essence in our being, with every modicum of intellect that each of us purports to have, and push back. Our governments and all their players are complicit, whether they knowingly or through their own ignorance are facilitating the Great Reset. If they use the language of sustainability, if they use the language of coercive measurements or of the Great Reset, then we must call them out and we must remove them from government. We must involve and we must impart a national government, a government that will defend the nation state of Ireland, a government that will put its people first and businesses at the back of the queue. This is what the National Party and this is what other parties of nationhood will strive for. And if you understand what this piece has just put together for you, then we have got a fork in the road. You can either meekly go along and acquiesce and condemn generations of your future, your children, your progeny, should they even be your progeny, because of the transhumanist horror shit show that we're all being conditioned through LGBT, through chopping your cock off or ripping your tits off. If that's not even a possibility, that is the past of the stakeholder capitalists. Each and every one of us is nothing but a consumer or an edit or an asset to be asset stripped down to its bare meaning. You were born into a world of fascism, and you will leave when your usefulness has come to a completion because you cannot work, you don't have the dexterity in your fingers, or you don't have the acumen of your mind to be of any profitable use to the stakeholders, and you will then be terminated. We are already on the road to making it normative with euthanasia. Resist, turn back to God, and fight for your freedoms. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to sign off there. Live chat, see you again in the next episode. Live chat, those of you that stuck with it an hour and a half, God bless you. But this is what we need to fight back with. Link in the description box here. You can get that article if you want to read through it yourself. Before I let you go, please don't forget to smash that like button, hit the subscription button if you've managed to stay here towards the end. Also, please leave your thoughts, comments, and witticism, and spread that article on. Spread that article nearest and dearest, or spread this broadcast of the entirety of it and push it out there. We are demonetized, but we are not demoralized, and we keep soldiering on. Each and every one of you that has contributed, but I beseech, I importune you to carry on, to keep pushing out and keep giving as much as you can. And if you cannot help in a financial way, then smash that like button and help push us into the algorithms and smash forward. If you haven't done so already, please join the new live chat over on Telegram till we get our live chat facilities back. And also send us a mail, PO Box 13179 in the mail. Live chat, you've been fantastic. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you in the morning. Oof, that was a long one, wasn't it? My God, that was a long one.